Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, December 5th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The game against Michigan is in 359 days. All right, it is the show you have probably all been waiting for. I know about the middle of the second quarter, I thought, oh boy, I can't wait to talk to Ross Fulton about the Ohio State offense this week. Here it is, the show about the Ohio State offense this week with our buddy Ross Fulton of BuckeyeHuddle.com. When we talk to Ross, we are sponsored by Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus today. All right, Ross, I think we are setting a personal record for most clips in any show. And so there's going to be a lot to get to. But before we get to that, I just want to ask you the question I was waiting to ask you from basically the first half of the game on. And I saw a lot of people asking it online. Okay. What was the deal with all the inside running when you knew the offensive line, the interior of the Ohio State offensive line was, a work in progress. The interior of the Michigan defensive line was really good. Did you have as big a problem with that? And if so, or if not, what do you think the game plan was there? And did they adapt that soon enough when it didn't really work?
Yeah, I guess I'd say I have mixed opinions on it. I don't like the plan, so I'll put that out there. But the first thing I would say off the top is I think as we move further and further away from this game, I think a lot of the focus is on the offense and what they called or didn't call. And the first thing I would say is, but for 4 really bad special teams plays, 2 missed field goals, Travion Henderson letting the ball bounce in front of him, and then I'd say the combination of Caleb Downs not fielding that punt combined with a very short punt to follow that set up a Michigan field goal with 0 yards gained by Michigan on that drive. Ohio State wins that game, right? And then you particularly put that together with 2 Will Howard interceptions. Take those away, Ohio State wins that game. So none of that has to do with running the football up the middle, right? So given now that, yes, I in one hand, I can see where they were coming from at different points because Michigan, as we will get to, was playing a ton of too high safeties. The numbers were there to run the football. I would say that Will Howard was struggling at times, both, I think with diagnosing a lot of what Michigan was doing from those too high looks. Obviously, the interceptions both impacted the game. I think it impacted his confidence, which we'll get to. And I think he became less effective after each interception. And so I think there were points in time. And then, because of some of those special teams mistakes or just feel like several drives, Ohio State was pretty backed up, right? And we're going to show one of those. So you got to take that into consideration. I think that before the missed fielding field goal, I think at that point, given everything I just listed off, it's like, let's get our 13 points here and get out of here. And this is going to be an ugly win, but we do not think Michigan is going to be able to score again on our defense. And so there is some game control stuff involved in that. All that's to say, though, that no, I do not agree. I do not know. And we can get into this with some of the particular plays. Like, it wasn't just running up the middle. Like, clearly they had the plan to run outside zone a bunch. I don't know what they saw that they thought that was going to work. Because you still have to be able to control those defensive tackles. And I just think that they left yards out there by not continuing to go to the concepts that showed they could work. And I think, we need to talk about going forward. You have 3 weeks now. They get a second chance, or maybe want to call it a third chance. It's pretty much for the first time in college football history that the offensive line, Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons are not coming back. So what are and I'm sure people are going to copy Michigan. So you got to come up with ways to move the football.
All right. So let's start looking at this game, and let's start with the very first play of the game. Going back and rewatching the opening drive of the game, in the back of my head, I'm going, oh, well, they're certainly going to punch in a touchdown here as they're just marching down the field. And that started with the very first offensive play of the game.
Yeah, I think what's all the more frustrating is there's been times this season where Ohio State started slow and it took them a while to get going. This was actually a good opening sequence for Ohio State, right? Like, they force a punt, I think, after one first down by Michigan, and then they get going and they come out throwing the football. And so, you expected that to keep going. I think in hindsight, obviously hindsight's 2020, who knows what would happen if the whole game, it was like, you just get yourself up a touchdown, get up 7 points, and then you can go back to the run game. They just could never get themselves there. But, this is kind of some of the stuff that I find frustrating given how they open and then what they went to. But, right away, they just run this, little backside hitch off an RPO to Carnell Tate. So you can see actually this first play right away shows a lot of Wink Martindale and Michigan's strategy, at least against the passing game, right? So you got 2 high safeties. What they were doing a lot of was it was basically just a page from what Jesse Minter did last year. You got Jeremiah Smith as the outside receiver. And so what they're going to do is roll the coverage to Smith. It's this Michigan Ravens defense kind of comes from Vic Fangio, for those who are interested, sort of like the forerunner of it. Fangio, they call this Zeus, is the fancy coaching term for it. It just means to the two, if the guy you want to target, which here is Jeremiah Smith, last year's Marvin Harrison, is the outside receiver to one side, they're going to play cover 2 to that side, so that they're basically having a safety over the top of them, and then they're going to play cover 4 to the other side. So you can do this with split safeties, right? And so this is just easy RPO hitch against Howard the backside linebacker comes down. Now that sort of stops as the game gets up going on, and we can talk about that. The corner bails for cover 4, deep coverage, just pitch and catch. I think at that point of the game, I posted on Blue Sky something like, Ohio State needs to RPO all game. And unfortunately, I can certainly show instances where they did, but it was too sporadic for my liking. And I just, again, looking forward, I just think they need to wear these concepts out. And if a team sits on it, you need to come up with different ones that they aren't sitting on, or just continue to work at it. There were times during that game or upon rewatch where the RPO in terms of the read was to give. And I was just thinking to myself, man, regardless of the read, I wish Will Howard would have pulled and thrown it, because who knows what would have happened. And I'd rather have the football outside and maybe, Jeremiah Smith or Ibuka or Tate make someone miss, as opposed to just running into the teeth of Michigan's defense.
Well, one of the things that I think I felt after the game probably limited them to a certain degree was they were backed up. They had bad field position a lot throughout the course of the game. And we talked about the punt that bounced. We talked about the kickoff that bounced. They also, the good news is the defense got some stops deep in its own territory, deep in its own red zone, but that meant the offense was starting with the ball kind of in the shadow of its own goal line. And it felt like they were a little hesitant to get too aggressive when they were backed up like that. And this is one of those plays where they were backed up near their own end zone.
Yeah, I know there's no doubt that played a role. And obviously with the exception of probably the short fields they got off of the, when right before the Will Howard second interception, and then off the Caleb Downs interception, there's several times when they're backed up. And as you said, so this is what they tend to do when they're backed up, right? So maybe this is a poor example, but I do think it shows some of why they could not run the football. So they're just running this is not a read or anything. This is just a base block, because the tight end you can see is blocking the backside defensive end. So it's just get us out of here, kind of inside zone play. But again, Michigan's in cover 2 here, right? You got 2 really deep safeties. The numbers are there to run. It's 7-on-6, but they can't do it. And so when you go to the inside view, you can see there was a strategy beyond just Mason Graham destroying Ohio State's interior 3, which happened plenty of times. What Michigan did through different types of stunts and linebacker blitzes a lot was essentially create a bear front, right? So number 30, Rolder for Michigan here does it. And they do it different ways, but here he just blitzes right at the center, right? So you've got 3-on-3. So there's no double teams. This was the biggest issue for Ohio State's zone run game, is they could never get double teams correctly. There was either because of the alignment of Michigan, or because of the poor execution by Ohio State in terms of either not, because of the techniques Michigan was using, not realizing who needed to double team, or coming off those double teams too quickly to get to a linebacker, when in reality, the first thing you have to do is establish the double team and get movement. Because there were just too many times where someone would come off a double team, leaving their counterpart with Mason Graham, and Mason Graham would throw that guy like a rag doll. And so that happened too often. But here, so yes, Michigan only has 6 guys, but there's no double teams, right? So there's no movement inside. Like those 3 guys from Michigan are controlling Ohio State center and guards. And there's just nowhere to go to run the football. Like part of the downside of inside zone, like running it like this from the gun, is you just can't get to the front side of the play, really. Like you can't get, in theory, maybe outside of Josh Fryer, you could bounce the ball. It's just really hard to do that. It's really just a cutback, and there's just nothing there, because then the nickel can come clean it up eventually.
Okay, so inside zone didn't work. Ross, I think it's time to try outside zone. This is one, and I was looking at this. I'm like, which one was this? Because it felt like there were a bunch of these where Quinshon Judkins sort of ends up going east-west and ends up with like no gain or maybe a loss of 1.
Yeah, I will say, like, Chip Kelly, particularly like in his Oregon days, made this sort of outside zone from shotgun. And by shotgun, I just mean the back offset next to the quarterback instead of like pistol or under center. He had a lot of success with it. It is not my favorite because of this east-west element. Like stretch, we've talked about a lot, right? Like you're pushing the ball to the edge to create cutback lanes. And it's very difficult for a guy running laterally to do that. And Michigan would just string these plays out. I guess the theory, this one's from behind the end zone. They put Smith and Ibuka to the wide side of the field and run to the boundary opposite that. And hopefully Michigan rolls or covers that way. And I guess they think they can get outside on these. But you still need to create vertical movement on outside zone. And, Graham and Grant would just basically control the interior of Ohio State's offensive line and then just move them, right? So the play's just going sideways, but everyone else is going sideways. So again, you get this sort of bear look right here. It's Barnum for Michigan, blitzing right at the center, pushing Carson Hinsman backwards. So now again, you've got your 3-on-3, and then, this just Tegra Shapola, he's played a whole season. So this is not even a new player. Like his just continues to fail to ID things correctly, particularly on zone plays. Like he can't, I guess he thinks he needs to help out on Grant because he's in a 3 technique over him to start, but it's outside zone. You got to get lateral. And instead he sort of stays there and plants and kind of whiffs on 78. And then he has no chance to get to Hausman, number 15 for Michigan. So he can blow it up in the backfield. So this is obviously an egregious example, but again, it's just as I was saying, problems with double team identification and then sticking to it. You're going to double at least and try to create some movement, and it's better than nothing. But this sort of they kept finding themselves stuck in between, right? They're like, maybe I should double this guy so I'll get a hand on him and then get to the second level. And you kind of got the worst of both worlds. But the other thing I want to note about this, and we'll see this in the next clip too, is it's not to me, when I go back to the RPO part, a lot of plays were designed for Will Howard to be able to keep on zone replays, but Michigan was just more than happy to sit and force the handoff, right? So here he can actually he's reading Mason Graham and he's reading Guy. Ohio State, you can kind of see on the edge here, Ibuka and Smith are both sort of blocking. It's essentially they're arc blocking. And the goal is get that guy to break down and then you're, crash inside. And then you have lead blockers for Howard. But as I said, Michigan, we'll see it again here, just more than happy to force the handoff and let their interior control the game.
All right. And I promise this is the last bad run play. After that, we're not going to let the run game hurt you anymore. We'll have a couple good run plays and we'll start talking about the pass. But all right, Ross, one more bad run play for everyone.
Yeah, and then we'll get 2 good ones after this, I promise. And because I'm trying, we got to look forward, right? The season is not over. We need to triage this situation as best we can. So again, Ohio State was trying to do things. So I don't want to give the impression that, they just ran up the middle the same way time and again. There were strategies oftentimes. It's just that, the problem with RPOs and zone reads and everything else is it's not a true option in the sense that if you force the handoff, you still have to block the zone play correctly or whatever the front side run play is. And so Michigan, whether it was RPO Although I will caveat the RPO part of it by saying, like, I really think for these reasons, like, Ohio State should have just pushed the RPOs, like keep throwing the quick throws, or the read plays. Wanted Howard to get the ball outside, but that wasn't the read, right? So like here again, they run like this double arc. So you have two tight ends to the bottom and they're blocking those two guys. And the hope is that you're reading an interior defensive end and he's going to bite. And then you have those two blockers for Howard, but he sits, right? This is actually like Michigan, Martindale just basically ran back Jesse Minter's playbook against Ohio State without some of the disguise. But this is like the two steal we've talked about a lot from Jim Knowles. Jesse Minter loved running against Ohio State. So you've got sort of that defensive end at the bottom. He's playing the flat, but he's also available against the run. But, they force the football inside. Again, you can see Mason Graham is left one-on-one with Tegra Shapola. That is not a good situation for Ohio State. Like Tegra Shapola, sorry to continue to beat up on him, but like if you're not going to ID things well, like you better be powerful at the point of attack at least. Instead, he gets controlled by Graham and then thrown on the ground, and there's just nowhere to go. Eventually, that nickel's also able to insert himself against the run. So the long and the short of this is that in their current configuration, it's very difficult for any team to lose their two best offensive linemen. Like that is a situation that there's the one position that they could not afford those injuries that occurred. And they're really missing Seth McLaughlin. But they are at this point not a good zone blocking team because they cannot identify things and establish double teams well.
All right. So now we promised you it is going to get a little bit better now. We're going to move on to two run plays. And I'm going to say two run plays that worked. And you're going to go, I know which two ones you're talking about. And yes, you do. The first one is that pause option. And I'm going to have you describe this one. And then I want you to explain why they only ran it once.
This has been a complaint I've had of regarding Chip Kelly. I mean, this play in particular, right? Like, yes, it's sort of a counter play, like you're faking zone and running speed option. So they don't major in this, but the success rate on this play has been so ridiculously high. I would like to see Chip Kelly in general spam concepts, like meaning keep use them again until the opponent stops them. Other than maybe smash and curl flat in the pass game, which he like loves to rely on those two. Like he just doesn't really in inside zone, obviously, keep going back to things. But, this is a nice design too. So they go unbalanced. You can see I circled at the top. So G Scott's covered up. They probably expecting that this would get Michigan into a single high coverage, to the unbalanced, which they do. They go to cover 3. And so that gets you, when you send the guy in motion, the one-on-one block at the bottom, you don't even have to block him because he's dropping into a deep third. And then you're just optioning off the defensive end and getting outside. And so, when thinking about going forward, again, the key has to be finding ways to get the running backs outside in space. I don't know. I would love to see them continue to use this concept. Or, there's things they could do with like, quarterback run counter to the quarterback and bash opposite, which is just like back away. The Ravens do that with Lamar Jackson all the time. It's very Josh Allen, and it's a very popular NFL play when you have a running quarterback because it just gets the running back in space and it just makes for an easier read. They did run power read twice, which is you run power for the quarterback, the running back going to the same side. I don't think Howard read it particularly well either time because it's a little bit difficult to read, and so this play is just like a simple look at the defensive end. What does he do? Get it outside. But again, like this is the kind of stuff they're going to have to really focus on going forward because I just don't think that they can. Obviously, most teams are not going to have Michigan's defensive tackles. Certainly not two of them. But I don't think that they can go into a game thinking that they can rely on basing out of inside zone right now.
The other thing that I thought watching that was, oh boy, well, you can say over the years, how many times have you seen a team run pause option, speed option like that, and then have the quarterback take 2 steps forward and then drop back and, throw a pass out of that as well. That it all game along, I was like, well, certainly they must have been setting that up, right? And then you never saw it. So
yeah, no, I agree. I was just going to say in general, I thought there also was a lack of play action passing generally. Like there was one time where they got under center and they ran like, the 2-man Yankee concept we've talked about, like when they got to the Michigan 40. But I remember thinking to myself that was one of the drives that stalled out. Like, oh, here comes the play action pass because they're getting under center at the opponent 40, which is where they always run it. So that one was pretty obvious. There are other times when they ran outside zone and the backside defensive end tracked them down and been like, where's the bootlegs? Just some missed opportunities there. But yes, to your point, that's the kind of stuff that they're going to have to lean into going forward.
All right. And the next run, and the other good run on the day, this was, I think, 17 yards for Quinshon Judkins, really right up the gut. It was the one time they ran inside and really had notable success all day long.
Yeah, the irony of this is this is a Jim Harbaugh play. You can find clips out there of Tim Drevno breaking this down. It's a wham concept, or like Harbaugh calls it crunch. It's kind of an influence trap, right? So you're basically trapping back. The tight end is blocking the defensive tackle. The backside guard is blocking the other defensive tackle, and then you're releasing up on the linebackers like opposite them, and you're kind of counting on the guard pulling to get the linebackers out of position, and then creating a crease in between. Unfortunately, so they did run this twice. This is the second time they ran it. Unfortunately, on the first drive, when they kicked the field goal, this was the first down play before they stalled out. And Josh Fryer missed a block, and Travion Henderson inexplicably ran it the wrong way and tried to bounce it outside right where it would never work. They went back to, instead of like the demarcation they had between Judkins being the standard down back and Henderson being the third down back, they started Henderson. And unfortunately, I think Henderson reverted to some of his worst tendencies in terms of his vision and seeing cutbacks. But again, this is 2 points, just like the pause option. I think this is the kind of stuff they need to lean into. They're not blocking zone plays well. They did block counter Trey correctly one time in this game against Michigan. That was positive to see. So I think whether it's whams, these traps like they ran against Oregon, I think they're just going to have to be pretty creative in the run game and try to use down blocks and kickouts to get where they need to go, at least to have some semblance of a run game.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the pass game. We did one good play for you earlier, just as a little taste. We're going to get the real bad one out of the way right now. This is the first interception that set up Michigan's touchdown.
Yeah, again, Ohio State's backed up, and this is what I said to open with in terms of, I do have some sympathy for them because I don't think Will Howard was seeing things really well against all these split safety looks. Diagnosing particularly like the cover 8 stuff where you're playing cover 4 to one side and cover the wide side and cover 2 the boundary. I think he struggled with some of his reads here. This is just like a double seams out. I don't sure it's the greatest call right here in terms of the pass concepts. And I do think that they are in some ways missing some of what Ryan Day brought as a play caller in the pass game against some of these split safety looks. I think things are a little bit more basic right now. That was one thing we talked about with Chip Kelly, that he is not, he has never been to Day's sort of precision as a pass game play caller. But I do think there are concepts there that would work. But this one, I just think this is kind of emblematic of some of Howard's struggles in the game. I think he predetermined here that he was going to Carnell Tate to the wide side of the field. I'm not sure why. This is just basic cover 4 for Michigan, and the corner is able to sit on the route. He has Jeremiah Smith run the same route to the shorter side of the field that I think was a little bit more open. But especially the wind, I know people have sort of dismissed it. I do think you can see it here. Whether that gets into a conversation about Will Howard's arm strength, this is a long throw, and I thought it definitely fluttered, which exacerbated. But so as I said, they're in a tough situation where not running it well against too high looks. Quarterback was struggling some with diagnosing them, and their philosophy is to be able to run it against too high, and they weren't able to. But this is not the end all be all, but it is explanation of why don't you want to pass all the time? It's quarterback's not seeing it great. They were getting a lot of pressure in his face, even though they weren't getting sacks. So there's tough trade offs to be made.
All right, next up, We're going to go to one of the drive that really did look like the Ohio State offense, really one of two during the first half and maybe during the whole game. This was during the 2-minute drill. This is a nice throw to Carnell Tate as they had sort of just crossed midfield during that 2-minute drill right before halftime where they scored a touchdown.
Yeah, this was the drive where like you saw the things that I wish they would have leaned into more. The tempo, right? A lot of people have pointed that out. You'll see like here I circle like Michigan's still struggling to get in position. They've struggled with tempo this year. Ohio State went to it sometimes. They were doing it on the opening drive. They just seemed to struggle to stick with it. And then a lot of these like quick game slant concepts versus cover two. They went like the play before this. They went to that levels concept against cover two that we talked about against Northwestern. Then they ran double slants, which is a great cover two play. Then they run this like seam slants, so you run off the safeties in the interior coverage, and then you just basically have these one-on-one throws. Again, I think that, it was unfortunate that they didn't keep running these quick concepts in the second half. But again, like looking forward, I think this is the kind of stuff they're going to have to do more of. Like Howard's pretty effective at getting the ball out quickly. This gets your wide receivers the ball in space. I think they need to stop using Smith as such a vertical route runner all the time and get him some of these quick game throws because he's so effective with the ball after the catch. And so I think, again, this is the kind of thing, the plays that I'm showing that worked are my way of saying these are the kind of things they need to do more of going forward, because I do think they're going to see a lot more of the defensive philosophy that Michigan gave them in the playoffs.
All right. And the last one, this was, I think, a sneaky big play in the game. If you're just thinking through, this is the one where Will Howard is kind of in the pocket and then he rolls right to buy some more time and he finds Carnell Tate and Tate can't quite hang on to the ball. This was, I think, a sneaky big play that really kind of derailed the game. Would have probably been a first down and instead left them in 3rd and 5 that they didn't convert.
Yeah, I thought this was like the last gasp in hindsight, right? Like when they don't get this. This drive was honestly, like rewatching it, maybe the most troubling because this came after the second interception, just like a bad read by Howard. The game was still 10-10 at this point. I thought they're going to, again, you can see a lot of cover two here, or you're again getting like the cover two to the Jeremiah Smith side and cover 4 opposite it, right? So you're getting another cover 8. This is like this levels concept that I just referenced that they ran against Northwestern. Like you got, and to me, like both these deep dig routes are open. Like I guess maybe Will Howard would say he had pressure in his face and had to bail. I personally thought he got a little trigger or gun shy after the second pick. You had this play. Then on 3rd down, they ran a smash concept and Jeremiah Smith was the corner route. I thought, again, he was open and he didn't pull the trigger on that one. And then on the last drive when they were down, he would not pull the trigger. But yeah, obviously, the drop hurts, but I think he could have thrown this in rhythm. As I said, like Michigan was getting pressure. And so it's sort of hard to say. Maybe he felt that. But I think that the less they can rely on the run game, right, the more they're going to have to be able to rely on Will Howard hitting throws. And so that's part of why I go to, though, like on 1st down, you're going to have to do some more quick game stuff, slants, hitches, RPOs, sort of keep the chains moving and keep out of these must-pass situations.
So I think the last question I wanted to ask you is just a little more forward-looking. And how much of the issues that you saw on Saturday were really bespoke to Michigan, either just in terms of the rivalry and having the mindset you have to run the ball, or just the challenge presented by Michigan's defensive front, or something else that really is specific to Michigan? And how much of this is stuff that you're going to, that they're going to really have to work around? You've talked a little bit about ways they can work around things moving forward. How much is Ohio State going to have to reinvent itself in the playoff? And how much of this was, well, you had these issues against Michigan, but a lot of the teams you're going to face in the CFP are not necessarily going to present those same challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that this was not a result of Ryan Day listening to the peanut gallery saying you need to run the ball to prove you're tough and you have to win the running battle, because I just like those narratives are like you win a game by getting yards and scoring points. It doesn't matter how you gain those yards. And so like, again, like I do worry that there's been some peanut gallery influence. Like the special teams is another example, like put Travion Henderson on kickoffs because people complain like you need to gain yards on kickoffs. And like, it's like, no, just catch the ball and get the ball to 25. You have a good offense. Like kickoff returns are like a very passe thing at this point in football. Punt, like catch the ball first. And so but Michigan's scheme, obviously like this, Fangio, Minter scheme here has caused Ryan Day and Ohio State problems for a few years now. Like the two high safeties, it's pretty complex. It's messed somewhat with what they want to do. And they haven't been able to run the ball against those two high safeties well enough. But obviously that happened 2 years ago and they came against Georgia and played much better offensively. And so my hope is that like whatever the issues were, Ryan Day's takeaway is like, this is our shot. I've got the offensive line I've got right now. And like, we need to just let it loose and go. Right. And I don't care. I personally could care less if they rush for one rushing yard. Like you want to go win the game. I do think they're obviously for Will Howard's health and the offensive line's sake, like they need to come up with ways to run the football. And I think that's like to be gap heavy and to try to get the ball to the perimeter. But I just think that it is, again, a situation where like, I think the offensive line and like the run game in general, right, like has taken it probably, maybe with the exception of sometimes versus Penn State, there's been a steady decline and they haven't run the ball very well in the second half of the year generally. And so I just think, as I said, the offensive line issues their injuries are extremely unfortunate. Like that's just a horrible break. There's nothing you can do about it. And so I think you just kind of have to kind of use what's there. You got three great wide receivers, try to get them the ball quickly out in space in as many different ways as you can.
All right. Well, we will have plenty more to talk about on Sunday when we know what's going on with the Ohio State college football playoff situation, who they're going to play, where they're going to play. We'll find that out on Sunday. Before then, we'll try and get you a show breaking down the Ohio State defense. That's going to be much better news for the most part. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but much better day for the Ohio State defense than the Ohio State offense. A little different than some previous Ohio State-Michigan games. They'll break that down with Ross a little later on this week. And when we do, just like today, we'll be sponsored by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus. Named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus. Check out the menu and make a reservation for today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.